When I was reading Enlightenment Now, and I was struck by this, and I guess this is something that's always struck me, is that there's a power in mimicry and imitation that's attenuated in rational reasoning. And so I've been thinking again about Christianity from a psychological perspective. And I thought, well, one way you could characterize it is that it's a very long discussion about what constitutes the human ideal. And I've been thinking about what unites people. And you might say, well, that beliefs unite them. But I think it's the shared pursuit of an ideal that unites people, rather than beliefs about the state of the world per se. And so when I was reading Enlightenment Now, and when I read works of other rational Enlightenment types, it's this inability to inspire that torments me, because I appreciate the utility of the arguments and the power of the technology that's associated with rational thinking and all of that. But things seem to be disintegrating politically around us despite that rationality. And it isn't clear to me that it's sufficient force to hold back the tide. I mean, look what happened to Dawkins recently with the humanists, for example, which was quite shocking to me, and I suspect to him as well.
Me too, yeah. No, it is a challenge of how to engage people's, how to get their blood pumping, their adrenaline going. It's a dangerous thing if it can be commandeered by demagogues and by rabble rousers. I think it is worth it, and I think we don't know enough about this process to look at cases in which there have been constructive moral and social movements that have managed to get to engage people's emotions. Perhaps the civil rights movement in its heyday of Martin Luther King, when John F. Kennedy got a lot of people to join young people to join the Peace Corps. The founding of the United Nations was a source of great hope. I mean, the United Nations has its own pathologies, but in its time, even in things like there's a kind of pseudo-religion to some TED Talks where you've got a techno-optimist who proposes some way of dealing with climate change, with malaria, with parasitic disease. And in the room, you can feel that kind of elevation, that awe. I think we have to work toward not just engaging any old fervor, but to figure out how we marry that fervor to the causes that generally deserve it.
Okay,
yeah,
I'm
well,
going to play the skeptic. I'm going to play the skeptic here, because my new theme that I'm thinking through is unmoralize everything. That moralism, moral judgment, as I said, it's just it makes it difficult to find the truth, and so constructive moral and social movements. Well, we're all supposed to think, well, social movements are great, and the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, gay liberation, all the incredible rights movements of the last 50 or 60 years. But that's in part because we look back at the ones that were successful and that were really deeply right about righting injustices. And now, when I look at social activism on campus and among young people, I think I have a much greater appreciation for how hard it is to change institutions, especially complicated institutions that are generally trying to be open and humane anyway. And I look at the policies that many young people are pressing universities to adopt or pressing companies to adopt. And what I see happening is unmoored moralism, trying to change institutions without understanding them. And I'm beginning to think that social activism may on net be a negative thing to the extent that now it is governed more by the social dynamics of social media and self-presentation than by any real study of a problem and an attempt to come up with something that would work. So,
that's blindness, isn't it? I mean,
blindness. What do you mean? They're blind to what they're blind about?
Yes, exactly. It's ignorance of it. Yeah. Well, if you put someone on the spot and you ask them if they could run a nuclear power plant, they'll say no. But if you ask them what should be done about the entire world's electrical grid, they'll tell you the answer. Mm-hmm. And that's a good example of not decomposing the problem down into units that could actually be addressed intelligently. But so you're noticing this activism, and you're doubtful about its utility, and your solution and we can talk about this more, is to take the moral fervor out of it. So I was thinking recently about Jean Piaget's argument. His final stage of cognitive development, hardly anybody knows this, but it was the messianic stage.
Well, I've never heard about this.
Absolutely. There's many things about Piaget that people haven't heard about. That
messianic.
His goal was to unite religion and science.
Oh.
Yes. Piaget is a very strange character, and all you hear about is the rational stage theory. But anyways, the last stage was the messianic. And he identified that as a stage in late adolescence. Not everyone reached it, but that it involved a world-changing fervor, and he identified that as part of what catalyzed identity. And so we're seeing that these students, they come to university, they want to catalyze their identity in a profound way and orient themselves. And what seems to happen is the activist types tap into that and offer them a solution. And the solution seems dangerous, but it doesn't look like the intelligent people are offering anything that's useful as an alternative, because they're not getting anywhere with it. And so we have to ask ourselves exactly why that is. And part of it is the lack of romance, I think. When Orwell wrote about the Nazis in the 1930s, he was very careful to highlight their dramatic use of ritual and the romantic attraction. Now, of course, he was absolutely opposed to everything they were doing, as anyone rightly should be. But Orwell was very wise and about human nature in general. And there's a drama in what's being offered to adolescents that the rational approach doesn't seem to engender. And I don't know how to solve that problem. I think it's a terrible problem. But